Okay, so my name is Katie Sweetman, and I'm empowering astrology. And thank you for joining me for yet another webinar. This one, it was conceived. Let's say the astrology of 2019, and then I did what's called a astrology tune-up. It was, how do we kind of come back to the astrology of 2019 and look at the last 4 months. And I realized there's a lot of information to convey. And maybe we just tried doing a webinar for the month. And in a way, this is an extension of my horoscopes, maybe a supplement. It gives us an opportunity to, let's say, flesh out more of what I'm trying to communicate beyond, let's say, 500 words or 400 words, whatever it is. So this is meant to be a look. We'll have an overview, we'll also have a sign-by-sign look at what is going on into a question that was asked before we started recording. You do read for your sun and rising sign, and I do think that I do make that point in an earlier, well, we'll see. So this is your October 2019 astrology planner. This is October 1st, 2019. And again, my name is Katie Sweetman. I'm here in New York City. I'm a consulting astrologer. I'm also a psychic medium. And I started empowering astrology, hard to believe, coming up on 10 years ago. It'll be 10 years in January when I conceived of this thing called empowering astrology. So thank you for being part of my journey and part of my work, and also supporting what I do. So this is just the quick agenda. We're just going to have an overview for October. The next thing is the ingresses and stations, which I will explain what that means further. And then the new and the full moons. We have a full moon in Aries this month, and we have a new moon in Scorpio. And then look by sign what this means. So again, read for your sun and your rising sign. Your life runs on two clocks. It's kind of one of these fundamental points that I try to make with people, because I know I often get the question, which one is right? Is my rising sign more right? Is my sun sign more right? And I'm like, they are both right. So you will see how there's some similarities unfolding in both your sun and your rising. Now, provided your sun and your rising are different. And I just want to make a quick note about time zones and dates, because I know some of you are in Australia, at least, and I know I always get asked this question, what date does this apply for? I think a general rule, because I'm here in New York City and Australia is 14 hours ahead, I think it's a general good rule to just roll the date forward a day. It's very kind of a little sloppy, but it's going to, if I was with the information that I'm presenting, it's kind of biased for the US. So just something to keep in mind. In the case of the new and the full moons, I did give the dates and the time for Australia and New Zealand. So let's talk October 2019. So what's going on this month? Now, on a surface level, it's Libra season, and we're going from Libra to Scorpio. So astrology is a calendar for living. It is the wheel of life, and astrology teaches us that every experience that happens in life is somewhere in the zodiac wheel. There is a natural order and progression of things. And there's both this idea of astrology as seasons, like it actually kind of lines up with the seasons. Mind you, this is very northern hemisphere biased, but this idea that each successive sign takes us through an evolutionary experience. It's leading us somewhere. Just going to see, there's a comment. So yes, okay. I was just checking on the chat. So we're kind of straddling two very different signs. Libra is the sign of relationship, which I think might be the next. Libra is a sign of relationship, and it's about connection. It's about reaching out to other people. Now, previous to Libra, we've gone through each of the 6 signs from Aries to Virgo, Aries being the sign of the self, the sign of I. So when we get to Libra, in a way, we haven't really experienced partnership in this kind of this evolutionary story in the wheel of life. And so it's Libra that we kind of start to realize that there's someone across from us, so to speak, that life requires partnership and it requires negotiation and interaction. And this is something that I've said very often, that Libra is a sign of socialization, because you can say that Libra, is partnerships and marriage, but what's at the, let's say, the core of that? And I really truly believe that Libra teaches us how to socialize and how to connect with one another. So as I was saying, that Aries being the first sign of the zodiac, you have Libra as the opposite sign. And so if Aries is the I, the individual, the self, then Libra is the you and the I. You have this natural polarity of Aries and Libra. They are the signs of relationships. They just do it very differently. And again, this is another thing about being in the Northern Hemisphere. I mean, yes, Libra is the equinox, and it's equal day and equal night, but the thing that it's the start of a different season in the Southern Hemisphere. Here in the Northern, it's the start of autumn. So the thing about crossing the equinox and going into Libra season is that the days start to become longer. We are now starting to descend into darkness. It's a literal descent into darkness. The days, there's more, the nights are longer, but it's also a metaphorical descent into darkness. So when we leave Libra and then we enter Scorpio, which is it's a sign that coincides with the world starting to decay. We've gone from, let's say, the harvest and the gathering of Virgo season and the sharing, Libra, of what we've gathered and harvest, but the world around us when we reach Scorpio is starting to die. The leaves are falling, for example. They're changing. It's getting colder. And so this idea that Scorpio is a sign that speaks to death, everything must eventually die. And I know that death is a word, and mind you, I am a Scorpio. I know that death is a word that kind of makes people uncomfortable, but there has to be some place in the zodiac that is reserved for death, meaning, some place that a sign that has to take that experience in, so that we can experience it and learn from it. So when we go into Scorpio, we are, let's say, crossing into an experience that will make us uncomfortable. It's a time when we have to face our fears. We have to dig into ourselves and let go of what we don't need anymore. So let's talk about the ingresses and stations for October. And if this might be some fancy astrology terminology. An ingress means a planet has entered a sign, or in some cases it's gone the other way through a retrograde and it's gone into the sign previous. A station is when a planet changes direction. So when you're looking at the astrology of the month, this is some of the things that you consider. What planets are changing directions? What planets are going into new signs? Because that's going to, I always use the metaphor that astrology is just looking at the hands on the clock. And let's say if you're noticing that the hands on the clock are starting to change hours and they're starting to point to particular places, that tells you about the quality and nature of the time in the upcoming month. So Pluto is the first planet that makes what's called a station. Pluto changes directions on October 3rd, so actually a couple days from now, and it turns direct. It's been retrograde since April, and that's actually very normal. The outer planets, and when I say outer planets, I mean Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Pluto, they spend 5 months, 4 or 5 months of the year retrograde. So that's pretty common. I know this as a completely unrelated side note. Some people will say, oh, I have, Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus retrograde in my chart. And I'm like, well, that's chances are you've got like a 60-40 chance of having those planets retrograde when you were born. So when a planet changes direction, so in this case, Pluto is turning direct, it saturates our feelings, our experiences, and the collective with its archetype. And we all know Mercury retrograde, things get a little weird around Mercury retrograde. So what does it mean when Pluto turns direct? Now, Pluto is the planet of the underworld, the shadow, looking at let's say, the hidden side of life. It's about power and control. It's about learning about power and control, and sometimes, let's say, the darker side of power and control. Pluto is one of those planets that has a deep connection to our karmic and soul level experience here on Earth. So when Pluto changes direction, things that we're feeling and things that we are experiencing have subtext to them. Meaning it might look like it's about one thing, but it's actually about something else. The experiences that we have might be hit a deeper point within us, depending on what sign you are, and we will talk about this more when we get into the sign by sign look. The Pluto changing directions this week might have actually a big impact. In fact, if you are a Capricorn, you're in this kind of prolonged state of completely transforming, because Pluto is a planet that ultimately, like, something has to transform. It needs to, almost like change shapes, change bodies. Again, strong metaphor. I'm a Scorpio, but it's like something has to die so it can be reborn. The other planet that's changing signs is Mercury goes into Scorpio on October 3rd. And Mercury is actually going to spend quite a bit of time in Scorpio. Normally, Mercury will spend about 2 weeks in a sign. Like, that's at its fastest rate. But because Mercury will turn retrograde later this month, it's going to spend a long time in Scorpio. So when Mercury turns retrograde, we're working on that sign that Mercury is turning retrograde in. So in Scorpio, Mercury is very deeply perceptive. It's almost like, Mercury, if you know somebody has Mercury in Scorpio, they know everything. Nothing gets past them. They're incredibly sharp people. So Mercury in Scorpio for all of us is we're searching for information, we're digging out information, having, let's say, very revealing conversations over the next 4 weeks, if not longer. Maybe people are confessing things, maybe information is coming out. Scorpio is a sign that has a tendency to reveal things that have been hidden, and Mercury is the planet of communication and information. So that's just something to keep in mind. Venus also changes signs on October 8th. It goes into Scorpio. It will spend all of the rest of October in Scorpio. Now, traditionally, Venus is not at home in Scorpio. We would say that Venus is in her detriment. But this I think it just means that Venus is not able to act in the way that it normally is able to act. So normally Venus is very, let's say, the peacemaker. It's like, what do you want? Here, let me help you. How can I, smooth things out? That's a very Venus quality. But in Scorpio, Scorpio is what's called a Mars-ruled sign. Scorpio is about power. It's about transformation. It's anything but docile. So, Venus, if it's love, if it's a planet of love, then in Scorpio, it has this magnetic charm. It has sexuality. It can be seductive. But also this idea that love can be transactional, for better or for worse. Here, let me do something for you, but what do I get out of it? So we're going to see, I think, with Venus and Scorpio, especially because we're still in Libra season, the darker side of relationships. The way that I see astrology is that there's times when we have to become aware of certain things in our life that we are otherwise kind of on autopilot. And so when Venus goes into Scorpio, we're checking in with our relationships, but where's the balance of power in our relationships? Are we letting people walk all over us, for example? So Venus in Scorpio can be a time when we really kind of, get our spine back, so to speak. Are we in a situation that's toxic and abusive? How do we kind of extricate ourselves from that? How do we find ourselves within that? How do we negotiate something like that? So that's, Venus in Scorpio. And then, going to October 23rd, the sun goes into Scorpio. So we're going to be entering Scorpio season in very, very shortly. And then, as I was saying earlier, Mercury stations retrograde on October 31st. So if Scorpio is about things that are hidden, maybe the shadow side of life, then I think that Mercury retrograde in Scorpio means that we have to go back and look at, let's say, how we communicate, what we choose, how we interact with people, and how, these kind of power dynamics. But information might come to light about something around at the end of October. Sometimes when Mercury stations, information can kind of get leaked, or suddenly it comes out. As I mentioned earlier, there is a new and full moon this month. The first one is a Aries full moon on October 13th. So this one is, let's say, the complement to the Libra new moon that we had on September 28th. And when we have an Aries full moon, it's about action and immediacy. Aries, being the first sign of the zodiac, it does very much play into partnerships and connection and interaction, because the sun is in Libra. In order for there to be the Aries full moon, the sun has to be in Libra. So we may have to take action with the relationship. If you are listening to this webinar and you're currently in a relationship and you have I don't know what's going to happen, is this working out, then the Aries full moon might kind of push the issue. There's nothing subtle about an Aries full moon. This is a strong metaphor, but it's like noticing that there's a fire and you have to go take care of it. There's no thinking. It's just action. Aries is also a very instinctual sign. Because this full moon makes what's called a square to the nodes, as well as Saturn and Pluto, this full moon might have a little bit of an eclipse, like an eclipse vibe to it. So the things that we are having to take action, the events that are coming up that demand our attention, might have a bit of a dramatic flair to them, because Aries is not a subtle sign, but neither is eclipse energy. So this full moon, depending on what sign you are, might push your life in a different direction. It might close a door, it might open a door, but you have to take into account the story that's been unfolding with the previous eclipses. We had them in July of 2018, in January of 2019, and July of 2019. Those are all in the same series. So stories from that time might kind of come back. So I'm just putting this up. This is for those who want to know what time the full moon is for your location. So I do have the times. I won't read them out, but you can see the slide for those that are listening. I kind of already said this already, but this Aries full moon does sort of, let's say, bring up like a resolution or show us something that began at the new moon on September 28th. So 2 weeks later, it's always 2 weeks later, we have a new moon in Scorpio. This one is actually quite interesting. Now, normally, a Scorpio new moon, it's all about, we're entering a new lunar month that's focused on needing to, let's say, look at the deeper side of life. Scorpio is deep emotions. It's psychological. It's the psyche. It's secrets, it's things that are hidden, so things we're kind of getting to the bottom of things. But Scorpio is also about intimacy and vulnerability. So we're entering a season where we have to get a little raw. We have to open up. With Libra, everything can be very surface, oh, that's fine. It's okay. Don't worry. But Scorpio is like, no, we're going to deal with this. We're going to face this. The reason I think this new moon is interesting is because it picks up on Uranus and Taurus. It makes what's called an opposition to Uranus and Taurus. And if you are a certain sign, and mainly the Taurus, the Leo, the Scorpio, and the Aquarius in particular, this new moon is going to put it's going to be like the next chapter or the next page or whatever metaphor you want to use in our Uranus and Taurus story. So this new moon might mean that there are some twists and turns, and for the signs that I mentioned, something I know for me as a Scorpio, like my life is shifting radically, because I'm getting the Uranus energy. So this might be the next, kind of give me more insight, for instance, on what is opening up for me as well. So this is what I was just saying a few moments ago, that we're checking in with our Uranus and Taurus story. I know I've done the previous webinar on Uranus and Taurus. It's a huge deal. Uranus went into Taurus back in March, where it will be for 7 years. So one part of our life is getting a bit of a shakeup right now. And here are the dates, or the times rather, for the Scorpio new moon on October 27th. So depending on if you're in East Coast in New York or out in Australia. So let's look at the sign by sign, what's going on sign by sign. And I will add, so again, pay attention for your sun sign and your rising sign. Now, if you are listening to this webinar and you have no idea what your rising sign is, make sure you know your exact birth time. You can look up on the internet, what is my rising sign, and you can go through, there's lots of programs. If that is too difficult, email me. I'm happy to help you find out what your rising sign is, but you do need your exact birth time. It gives you just a little bit more information about yourself and what's going on in your life. And maybe some of these other signs are not important to you. You might have an Aries or a Taurus, etc., in your life, so maybe it's worthwhile to pay attention. So Aries, you kind of, your sign picks up on a lot of the things that are already happening in general for Libra season. So for you, it's about relationships this month, but it's also about intimacy. With a lot of things happening in what's called your seventh house, your seventh sign, and your first house, your first sign, this is one of those bigger months of the year, months for your zodiac calendar. So I think that this is a big month for you, Aries. I think you're one of those signs that's having, it's a little bit of a crossroads this month. The first thing that's happening is that Pluto is turning direct in your career sign. So Aries, let me give you a little bit of some background. Pluto went into Capricorn in 2008. Yes, 2008. That's 11 years ago. It'll be in Capricorn until 2026. So you got more time. And this is for everybody now, but for you, Aries, this is your career sign. So something started in 2008 about completely transforming your career and transforming your direction in life. And there are points throughout the year where you kind of check in on this story or this evolution, this transformation. And this month is one of those times. And so when Pluto turns direct, pay attention to what's going in your career. It doesn't necessarily have to be career. It can be this idea of your direction in life, the things that you, what are your ambitions, for example? So you might be kind of focused on power or kind of getting ahead, or maybe you're rethinking the direction that you want to go in. As an aside, and I'm sure you're perfectly lovely and perfectly, on board of things, Aries, but I just have to say it's not a good time to try to, let's say, do things that aren't kosher, so to speak. I think that with Saturn and Pluto both in your career sign right now, you're under a lot of scrutiny. So just make sure you're just kind of buttoning all your buttons and straightening your hair and whatever, just because this is not the time to kind of push limits or push boundaries. It's important to note that when Mars goes into Libra, and Mars is your what's called your ruling planet, and Mars pretty much changes signs every 5-6 weeks. So every 5-6 weeks, your life kind of goes at a different direction, a different rhythm. So the last previous 5-6 weeks, Mars was in Virgo. And so you were working hard and having to take care of the details. But when it goes into Libra on October 4th, you begin this time of focusing on relationships. So if you are single, you might feel more motivated to make a connection to somebody. If you are in a relationship, you may need to really focus on that person's needs are more important right now, which might be, the thing about Mars going into Libra is that it's not classically happy in that sign because it doesn't get to take the lead. It has to, let's say, see what somebody else needs. But it will be in Libra until the middle of November, I believe. November 19th is when it goes into Scorpio. So on October 8th, Venus enters Scorpio, and Venus is your relationship planet. And so you're spending the rest of October focusing on intimacy, focusing on opening up and being real and raw and maybe a little bit uncomfortable as well. So if you're in a relationship, you might be having to talk about or even work through issues within the relationships that have to deal with intimacy and vulnerability and possibly even sexuality too. So the Aries full moon puts you in the spotlight because Aries is your sign. So it's a time when, maybe all eyes are on you in general. That's what usually happens around when there's a full moon in your sign. So it's a time to get noticed. It's time to get seen. It might be just kind of a big time for you in general. I may have made this point already, but it's important to note that this month, Mars and the full moon the full moon and I believe another planet that's kind of escaping my mind. I think it's with Pluto, are activating eclipse degrees. So there might be some twists and turns for you this month, Aries, especially in regards to relationships. The Scorpio new moon on October 27th talks about your emotional health. So, I already, talked about, let's say with Venus going to Scorpio, that you need to kind of focus on things around intimacy and vulnerability. Now, that vulnerability can be with, let's say, a therapist, doesn't have to be with a partner. But the point is that starting on October 8th or 27th, you need to start to go very deep into your psyche and into your deep self. So that might be a time when you're having to do some emotional healing. It is a time also where finance and assets are also highlighted. And then Mercury turns retrograde in Scorpio on October 31st. So if there is something coming up in regards to intimacy, conversations that are revealing and opening up, it might be something that you're having to rework through because Mercury turns retrograde. Parallel to all this, because Scorpio is a money sign for you, if you're having to do things with loans or finance or assets, make sure you try to get all that paperwork taken care of before the retrograde, because you might still have to, deal with things into November. So Aries, here's your important dates. I did mention that Mars going to Libra on the 4th kind of changes the tempo for you. On the 7th of October, the Sun squares Saturn. So for you, Aries, you've been working hard on your career to kind of build your career, to define your career, define what you want to do. And I think when the Sun squares Saturn on the 7th, it's a check-in on your Saturn story. How have you been tending to your professional life? And like I said earlier, this is not the month to slack off. It's not the month to kind of push the boundaries and see what you can get away with. So I think that Saturn's kind of, that check-in that's happening on the 7th is a good time to make sure you have your ducks in a row, so to speak. On the 8th, Mars opposes Chiron, and this is a little bit more of a subtle point, but because Mars is your planet, and Chiron right now is in Aries, and because there's all this deep themes for you this month around intimacy and vulnerability and shame or the past or having to deal with things, if you're feeling extra sensitive around the 8th, don't be surprised. That's why I kind of put the bit around Chiron in. Chiron will be in Aries, I think like for a few more years. It's like I'm blanking. I think it's like maybe 8 or 9 more years. But Chiron in Aries is really having to heal some things around courage and bravery and taking action, and maybe stuff from our past and childhood that got in the way of that. So So Venus opposes Uranus on the 12th of October. Venus is your relationship planet, and Uranus is a planet that demands authenticity, and it demands shaking up the status quo. So it seems like the boat is rocking in your relationships this month. Venus opposite opposite Uranus can be a little confrontational. So if you're in a relationship, just make sure that you're being proactive about taking care of things within the relationship that need attention. Because sometimes when we hit these dates, the things that we've kind of been putting off suddenly come to the surface. Again, there's an Aries full moon on the 13th, putting you in the spotlight. Mars square the nodes on the 21st. I put this in because the nodes the nodes are the lunar nodes, the nodes of fate. They talk about eclipses. It might be a time when you're at a turning point. I think there's some pretty intense energy in the beginning of the beginning of October, that does seem to kind of smooth out a little bit in some places, especially in the relationship department towards the end of the month. But you might be having to make some big decisions this month. And I think especially when on the 27th, when Mars squares Saturn, Mars squares Saturn you need to make sure that you are taking care of your responsibilities, that you are doing the right thing, that you are being accountable to yourself and to others. And if you are, great, Saturn will give you a pat on the back. But if you're not, Mars square Saturn puts you into reality. It puts you into that very intense reality at times. Mars square Saturn is a bit of an intense aspect. I personally have it natally. I just think that it just needs to work. It's kind of like a workhorse aspect. So Taurus. This is a time when it's about like the subtle side of life. It's about health. It's about taking care of yourself. It's like both physical health and spiritual health, but also how do you get your real world life in order so it can be work and projects. So there's a bit of an emphasis, right, in this, in October about this, what's called the 6th and the 12th house. Pluto is turning direct. For you, Taurus, Pluto is in your sign of beliefs and philosophy. It's in what's called the 9th sign, the 9th house. And you've been in this time where everything that you thought was real, everything that you thought the world and life is kind of been slowly coming down. Pluto has kind of been taking this sledgehammer at times to your sacred cows, or maybe what you believed in way back in 2008 is not what you believe in now. Maybe your whole sense of the world and your sense of yourself in the world has tremendously shifted. So when Pluto turns direct on October 3rd, it's checking in with that longer story that's been unfolding for 11 years. But it might be a time when you're really thinking more powerfully about these themes of faith and belief and even truth. Mars goes into what's called your 6th house on October 4th. For you, what I've noticed when Mars goes into what's called the 6th house, you're entering a 5-week, 6-week period of a lot of work. So this is going to be a month, Taurus, when you have to kind of get tidy. So you have to clean up, you have to organize, you have to make your to-do list. You're starting projects. Mars is initiative. It's action. You could make an argument that Mars is not particularly strong in Libra, but nevertheless, normally, let's say your day-to-day life is an area that you maybe kind of is not where you're working hard, but Mars is like comes in and it's like, okay, how do you get things organized? And the 6th house is also the house of health. So making sure that Mars has an outlet. So that could be going to the gym, going for a walk, maybe even taking a look or starting a new initiative around diet and fitness. So when Venus arrives in Scorpio on October 8th, it's going to go into your relationship sign. So Scorpio is Taurus's relationship sign. So when Venus goes into the relationship sign, it is a very natural time for you to want to connect to somebody else. Now, maybe that's a romantic connection. Maybe that's not a romantic connection. It could be a very social month for you. With Venus in your relationship sign. It could be a time when, if you're single, you're naturally making connections to people and maybe getting into a relationship. If you are already in a relationship, it's a time to kind of relook or reconnect with an existing relationships. I think that Venus in Scorpio, again, very seductive, very sexual, very flirty. So I don't know. I mean, I personally have Venus in Scorpio, so I think it's a nice combination. So enjoy having Venus in your relationship sign. So for you, the full moon puts into the spotlight what's called your 12th sign, your 12th house. And like I said, astrology is just a wheel of life, and the last sign of a person's chart talks about endings. And I know that that's like a little bit of like, oh, endings, but it's just a natural part of life. And there's times in the year where whether the sun going through Aries, or there's a full moon in Aries, or if there's a big planet going through Aries, it talks about endings. Or this idea of surrender. The 12th is where we can't have an ego. If we walk into the 12th house thinking that we're like big stuff and that we rule everything, then we're going to quickly lose our way in the 12th house, because the 12th house is the house of spirituality. So this full moon might also talk about these deeper questions of what you believe in. What is truth? What is faith? What is your connection to spirituality? It might be a time when you need to rest and to let go. So the Scorpio moon on October 27th opens a new chapter in relationships, because again, Scorpio is your relationship sign. When you have a lunar month happen in your relationship sign, it's 4 weeks of a renewal or new beginnings or new connection or even new relationship. Taurus, you do have Uranus in Taurus for the next 7 years. And so because this new moon opposes Uranus, it is a reminder that you are in a process of reinventing yourself. And as you reinvent yourself, and this is a necessary process, and I know I was saying this to my Taurus client a couple of days ago, Taurus is a sign that naturally doesn't want to leave its comfort zone. It doesn't want to shake things up, and yet nevertheless, that's what is being asked of Taurus right now. So this new moon might bring that story of reinvention and having to shake things up to the forefront. Mercury, it's again turning retrograde, but it's doing it in your relationship sign. So I know I've been like, yay, relationships for you, Taurus, but Mercury in your relationship sign means that you're going to have to do some extra work in the relationship department going into November. So if something begins now, if you do get into a relationship while Mercury is retrograde, that does not mean that it's going to not last, because sometimes that's a little bit of a myth, but it means that the connection that you have to the person, it might have deep roots. It might have maybe even another life. So pay attention to who's coming in and out of your life in October, who is maybe returning, because sometimes when Mercury turns retrograde in a relationship sign, old lovers suddenly come out of the woodworks. So I'm just giving you a warning, Taurus. So you've got a lot going on in the date department. No, that was not a pun intended. Today, Venus is square Pluto, so you're under a lot of pressure to transform. With, like I said, the sun squaring Saturn, it's a check-in on the work that you're doing with, let's say, higher education, how you're seeing the world. I've just noticed with my Taurus clients, you're getting this like 1-2 punch going on between having to completely reinvent yourself and then by extension, needing to shift your beliefs, shift the way you see yourself and how you see the world. When Venus goes into Scorpio, I think that the first week of October for you, Taurus, it's a little bit more focused on work. And then I think when it goes into Scorpio, then that's more about relationships. Mars opposite Chiron, Mars is your relationship planet, on the 8th of October. So you might be dealing with some old material, some old wounds, some old emotions around relationships. I would keep an eye on Venus opposite Uranus on the 12th. Venus being your planet, Uranus being this planet that is shaking and rocking your world. So the middle of this month might be a bit of a turning point. It might be pushing you out of your comfort zone in some way. And maybe that has to do with relationships. For you, the sun is a planet in your chart that's about home and family and emotional connection. So when the sun, let's say, squaring Pluto on the 14th, or even the sun squaring the nodes on the 6th, something might be coming up around family or home or your living situation. For you, the Scorpio new moon is a big deal this month because it's what's called in an angular sign. So again, this is ushering in a new chapter about relationships. Mars square Saturn. I know a lot's going on this month in relationships, and this is going to be different for everybody depending, every different Taurus. So if you are in a relationship, you might have to recommit to the relationship on the 27th or not, because Saturn talks about if it's not working, it needs to go. Or if it's working, okay, great. Mars square Saturn is, like I said, a bit of an intense aspect, but it might be a time when if somebody's coming into your life, then it might be a bit more serious. If somebody is, maybe you're on the fence about whether something's going to work, you might have to make a decision around that time. And then the next day, the sun opposes Uranus. So, Uranus has a tendency to awaken, to shock, to get us out of our status quo. So maybe whatever you're deciding is really shaking the foundation of your life. Gemini. So, this month for you, it's what's called 5th and 11th house energy. So it's about identity, 5th house, and then friendships and community, 11th house. Gemini, and I've said this before in my weekly Facebook lives, so definitely watch those if you are not watching them already, that I think, Gemini, you're one of those signs that's having a bit of a rough go this year. You have Saturn in what's called your 8th sign, and you also have Pluto. So when Pluto turns direct on October 3rd, I think a lot of deep emotions are coming up for you. You're doing a lot of heavy lifting in the psychological, emotional, spiritual department right now. Pay attention to what's going on. Pluto has a tendency to reveal, has a tendency to show, like hold a mirror to us. And sometimes the things that we don't want to look at, we project onto other people. So this week is a good week, Gemini, for you to actually look in the mirror and see what you don't want to see. And so that's, let's say, working positively with this Pluto energy. Mercury is your planet. It rules Gemini. So when it goes into Scorpio on October 3rd, it's going to be in your 6th house, and it's going to be in your 6th house for a long time because of the retrograde. So the rest of the month into November is about work. It's about getting yourself organized. It's about projects, jobs, schedule, the kind of that daily grind sort of thing. So when Mars enters Libra on the October 4th, it's going to activate your 5th house. So the 5th house for you is the house of pleasure and fun and creativity and identity. The 5th is where you get to kind of let your hair down and express who you are. So you might feel a little, let's say, sassy, maybe even a little flirty, because it's Libra. I know, Gemini, you like to be playful, so this is going to give you like that little bit of that boost of confidence. for the coming month, and like I said, the next 5 to 6 weeks. As I was saying, I know it's been a hard year, so maybe, having some fun and letting your hair down is what you really need at this time. So Venus is going to be in your 6th house starting on the 8th. Again, there's a lot about work that's going on this month. Venus at least kind of gives you some help. It's not maybe so boring. And then an Aries full moon on October 13th, that's putting the spotlight on friendships and community. And as I was saying earlier, an Aries full moon is about immediacy and action. So you might have to take action in friendships and your community. It's like, who's your friend? Who do you want to be your friend? If you're trying to focus on identity and being yourself, like, do you have friends that really respect and honor who you are, honor what makes you different? And then that Scorpio new moon again kind of turns things towards work and health. I think with the Mercury retrograde that's coming up on the 31st, I think it's a good time for you to really look at let's say, how you're taking care of your body, how you're taking care of your day, what needs to be focused on and taken care of, because that retrograde is going to make you kind of go back and kind of clean things up. So if you are starting a project, or if there's a project that's ongoing, Mercury retrograde might bring you back to that project. You might have to fix some things or tie up loose ends. So here are your important dates. Gemini, as I mentioned, Mercury goes into Scorpio on the 3rd of October, which is where it will be into November. You are doing a lot of practical work this month. When the Sun squares Saturn on the 7th, like I said, it's a check-in with your Saturn story this year. And because I think that this year has been a little bit emotionally heavy and maybe not super fun, if I'm being honest, I think Sun square Saturn is a check-in on how you're taking care of yourself. How are you, let's say, working on your emotional health? Maybe, and I've said this before, at least I've said it in other things. It's a good time to have a guide. Gemini, it's hard to go it alone when you're working on a lot of heavy emotional material. So whether it's a therapist or a counselor or somebody that can help navigate you, I'm just kind of putting that out there. So, Sun square Saturn on the 7th. Mercury also opposes Uranus on the 7th, and Uranus is the great awakener. So Mercury, you might feel very restless. You might feel very like you want to do something impulsive. You want to maybe make a choice or say something that's impulsive. So I'm just kind of putting that out there. Uranus can also shake things up, and since Mercury is you, because you are Mercury ruled, it might be shaking up your world in some way. I did put the trine to Neptune. I think of all the signs this month, the mutables, so Gemini, Virgo, Pisces, and Sag, not as much is happening. And so I think the Mercury trine Neptune on the 15th, it's a time when maybe you're just feeling extra psychic or extra intuitive. So I just kind of put that in there. Mercury also joins up with Venus on the 30th, and then you have the retrograde the next day. Mercury Venus kind of makes you feel social, or you have something beautiful to say. I always think of poetry with Mercury conjunct Venus, the singer. But I think, maybe you're getting some help in your day-to-day life. Maybe that you're getting some help for projects or help with the work that you're doing. But again, Mercury is retrograde. You're kind of retracing your steps in November. So pay attention to what's going on in October, because you're probably going to revisit it in some way. Cancer. So for you, Cancer, this is what's called a 4th and 10th house kind of focus this month. So that is home and career. These are what are called angular signs. So Cancer, you're one of those signs where this is a big month for you. Again, it's picking up on eclipse energy, and these eclipses have been in Cancer and Capricorn. So this might kind of bring up some stuff that has been unfolding at different points throughout this year, namely January and also July, the last time we had eclipses. So the 4th is home and the 10th is career. One of the areas that you've been doing a lot of work on this year, Cancer, is relationships. So when Pluto turns direct, and again, it's been in that part of your chart since 2008, you're having to do a lot of deep shadow work on relationships. The fight that you're having with your partner, what is the fight really about? Because it's probably not about what you're fighting about. It's, maybe some deep insecurities are coming up, maybe some stuff from childhood, maybe you're looking at a dynamic within a relationship that really needs to transform, and that's what Pluto does. Pluto is one of the outer planets, and the outer planets talk about the evolution of consciousness, which means that we sometimes have to look at ourselves and look at the choices that we're making and look at where we're going, because we can't keep going in that direction anymore. So Mars enters Libra on the 4th of October, and I've noticed that when Mars goes into the 4th sign, which is your sign of home and family, it can make the home environment a bit noisy. It could be quite literally that you're moving, you're planning a move, or you're making changes in the home, because Mars is not a quiet planet. It's like the god of war. For example, it's action, it's motivation. So you're taking action in the home, and it could be something as simple as you're decorating or you're just making changes in the home, but something might be coming up with home and family because Mars tends to kind of provoke and agitate. Venus goes into what's called your 5th house on the 8th. The 5th house is the house of romance. It's the house of identity, creativity, passion, fun. So that's nice. The Aries full moon on the 13th, Aries is your career sign. So you're going to have to make some decisions about your career, your direction, which way you're going. Sometimes with a full moon in this part of your chart, you get a job offer or you change jobs. Or you're having to, let's say, because of Aries is like that action, that immediacy, you really are kind of needing to take, change something about your professional life. But also maybe you're going out there into the world and you're being ambitious and you're going after what you want. So yeah, new moon in your 5th house on October 27th. I think that's nice to kind of have a time when you can focus more on fun or relaxation or whatever it is that you like to do. Like I said, astrology is a wheel life, so thankfully there's a place for fun, and so that's where the 5th house. It also talks about children. And then maybe romance, this idea of kind of flirtations, meeting new people. I mean, you do have Venus there as well. So if with Mercury turning retrograde, if you are having some flirtation and some romance, just make sure you're getting all the information, because sometimes Mercury can make things a little confusing. So Pluto turns direct, Cancer in your relationship sign. So that's a big deal this week for relationships. Mars going into Libra, like I said, it's about home. You might be making some big changes in your home or living situation this month. Sun square Saturn, because Saturn has been in your relationship sign since the beginning of 2018, so it's a big year for relationships. And I think that Saturn is checking in on your progress is checking in on your choices and your decisions. And so just make sure that things are going great and sound and you're doing your work when you have that check-in with Saturn on the 7th. Venus opposite Uranus, Venus for you is your planet of home and family. It's your roots. And so something might be shaking your foundation this month. So that's just something to keep in mind. I don't, again, if you're planning on moving, maybe the move is like you're moving someplace very different than you would normally, because Uranus talks about things that can sometimes be very radically different. The Aries full moon puts your career in the spotlight, and then Mars square Saturn. Because Mars is your career planet, you might have to make some decisions about your career at the end of the month. What do you want to be when you grow up? What's your ambitions? What's the next step? So Saturn is kind of putting the pressure on your career. And maybe if something does come up with the full moon, seeing how Mars square Saturn kind of gives you some more clarity at the end of the month. So Leo. So Leo, this is a time of travel and education for you, because 3rd and 9th houses. The Pluto, it turns direct in your sign of health and work on October 3rd. So Pluto, you've been doing a lot of deep transformation in how you take care of your body and how you organize your daily life. And this, again, has been going on for 11 years. So Pluto turning direct is just another page, another chapter, and a very long story. So see what's coming up in health and work and diet and nutrition this week. Look at the kind of the deeper story. I don't think there's anything you should be worried about. I mean, I know some Leos, let's say, for instance, they've become very health conscious in the last decade versus maybe before that, they weren't at all. So as I said at the beginning, this is a time of travel and education for you. So when Mars goes into your 3rd house, it's probably going to be a very busy month. The 3rd house is the house of, it's travel, but it's like you're on the go, you're commuting, it's back and forth kind of travel. It's, it's kind of like a Gemini energy. So it's very restless. It's got a short attention span. So it might be a very busy month for you. Busy with appointments, busy with places to go, people to see. And then you might kind of have this constant stream of information and communication that's happening. You might feel very motivated, Mars, to take classes and to learn and to read. So that's something to keep in mind. When Venus goes into Scorpio on the 8th, it does go into what's called your 4th house. So you might see a time when you want to spend some more time at home, but in a way, maybe you're bringing Venus into your home environment, which means beauty. It could be something that it's decorating your home or making your home environment seem nicer, because that's what Venus does. So the Aries full moon on October 13th, it's in what's called your 9th sign. So you might be planning a long distance trip this month. It could be a trip to another country. It could be a trip to the other side of the country, but there's a sense of distance and journey that, the distance that's being traveled in October. Or if you're not packing your bags or even thinking about a trip, you might be thinking in life in more philosophical terms. What do you believe in? What is your truth? What do things mean? And since Aries is a sign of immediacy and action, it's something that might really seize your attention. So keep that in mind. The Scorpio new moon, as I was saying, with Venus in Scorpio, it's a new chapter in home and family. So you've sort of, let's say, spent the majority of October on the go, traveling, information, learning. It's like busy, busy, busy. And then you get into Scorpio season, and it's about kind of settling down for a month and kind of getting into your nest and getting into your roots. So home and family are going to be a major focus over the coming 4 weeks of the lunar month, so into November. Because Leo, you are Uranus is in your 10th house. So, and I've been saying this to my Leo clients, you're in a 7-year chapter of reinventing your career and reinventing your direction in life. So this new moon on the 27th might kind of poke at that unfolding story. So with Mercury turning retrograde on the 31st, if anything is going on in the home, if you are making decisions about where you live or maybe decisions with family members, just Mercury retrograde, just give yourself some wiggle room. Personally, I'm not somebody that freaks out about Mercury retrograde, but it does talk about the process of going back and looking at something, and sometimes, depending on what we're doing, that can be a little inconvenient. So Leo, these are your important dates. At this point, we're pretty much past Venus square Pluto. I just think that you're stepping into October, needing to make some major decisions about your career and your direction. And Pluto might be kind of pulling at maybe what you want versus what forces beyond your control. So speaking of forces beyond your control, Sun square the nodes on the 6th, you might feel like you're at a turning point or at a crossroads. The nodes are the nodes of fate. So you might feel that there's a lot of meaning and symbolism and heaviness to what's going on, which also could be Saturn, because Sun square Saturn, and Sun is your planet, by the way, Leo. You have a date with Saturn, and Saturn is saying, hey, what's going on? How are you taking care of yourself? How are you being responsible in your life and showing up in your life and showing up in your career? So you might kind of get that check-in with Saturn. So if you are thinking about making big career changes, Saturn might be kind of slapping you around a little bit in a loving way, about, what serious steps are you going to do in order to make that happen? Mars is opposite Chiron on the 8th. I mentioned that because Mars rules what's called your 4th sign. And so you might be feeling some deep family stuff, maybe even some core wounds. So maybe with some of the things that are shifting for you this month, it's really maybe hitting on some old stuff for you, Leo. Venus opposing Uranus, again, you're in this time, Leo, of rethinking what you do professionally and maybe even going in a very different direction. So Venus opposite Uranus, you might be looking actually to make some big changes in your career. You're feeling restless, you're feeling impulsive, but you might not, at the very least, be completely into what you're doing anymore. Sun square Pluto, there is a full moon on the 13th. I didn't include it in this list because it's not as prominent as some other things. Sun square Pluto for you, it's a power day. It's a time to change. It's a time to kind of assert your power and your dominance. But Mars square Saturn on the 27th, you might need to make some decisions about your living situation and your home environment and your family. It is a little bit of a serious aspect, Mars square Saturn. So just make sure you're, kind of showing up for Saturn and doing the right thing. So the new moon on the 27th, you might be entering November, looking to make a change in your home environment, make a move. Again, Mercury is going to be retrograde, so just kind of put that in the back of your head. Sun opposite Uranus on the 28th, because the sun is your planet, you're looking to really shake up the status quo. It's like, who are you? Who are you really? And sun opposite Uranus kind of shakes away the things that aren't really you. And it's a time to really be yourself, but you might have to confront the ways in which you're not being yourself. Virgo. So for you, Virgo, it's about money, but it's also about these kind of deeper things this month, which is about stability, facing your fears. The second house is a money house, so is the eighth, but it's about this, like, what do you need to feel safe and secure in the world? So Pluto is turning direct in what's called your fifth sign. So Virgo, you kind of like Taurus, kind of have been getting this 1-2 punch. I mean, for you, Virgo, it's a month, it's actually a year where you have to take yourself seriously. You have to strip away all the things that aren't really you. You also have to take your talents seriously. So Pluto, when it turns direct, and this is a 11-year process at this point of really transforming who you are. It's a check-in on this progress. Mars entering Libra on the 4th, it's going into your money sign. So typically when Mars is in this part of your chart, you feel very motivated to focus on your material needs. So that can mean making more money or kind of taking action to make more money. Getting your resources, so your basics, your shelter, your food in the kitchen kind of thing. It's how do you get your physical life situated? Venus in the 3rd, it just might mean that communication, you're feeling maybe a little bit more flirty in your communication. But Venus, it's a planet that likes to kind of smooth things over. It's negotiate, like how do we find a way to work together, kind of a thing. So that might be the quality of your communication in October. So an Aries full moon on the 13th, it's putting into the spotlight this deeper stuff, your deep self, your psyche, you're facing your fears, facing yourself. Aries is that sign for you that talks about the deepest, darkest parts of you. It's so you're having to look at your emotional material and your emotional health this month on the 13th. Also, because Scorpio is Aries is a money sign for you, this can mean having to take action with finance and assets, debt, or even wealth. So that Scorpio new moon for you is about travel and communication, education. It's a new beginning. It's a time when going into November, it might be very busy. You might have a lot of appointments. You might have a lot to say. You might be taking more classes, but knowing that Uranus is kind of in the opposition for that new moon, you might need to get back to basics. You might need to completely, let's say, disregard a lot of the things that you thought were true or you believed in and get new information, because you're in a time of awakening right now, Virgo. Travel might be very revealing and very life-changing. So that's a big statement. But, with Uranus, it's such a wild card. You might be meeting people and going places that just completely change how you see the world or change how you see yourself. With Mercury turning retrograde, because it's in your communication sign, just what you're saying, just be very mindful what you're saying, because of the choices that you're making, because you're going to have to go back and revisit them. Communication just might be really wonky for you towards the end of October and into November. So Virgo, these are your important dates. Saturn, Sun square Saturn, that's a check-in on how you're doing on taking yourself seriously, taking your talents seriously. And so Saturn's like, hey, what, how's it going? Mercury opposing Uranus, that can be a little bit of a confrontational energy on the 7th. Again, Uranus in your 9th is just trying to completely shake the way you see the world, because I think your mantra right now, Virgo, is what if I'm wrong? Meaning, because sometimes, Virgo, you're a sign that knows a lot, and you're a very, very, very capable sign. But sometimes we can get very, let's say, get our blinders on. And this is not a time to have your blinders on and kind of think that you know exactly the way everything is. So Uranus might be shaking up your world right now. Again, I am throwing in the trine to Neptune in case you're feeling very intuitive or psychic, or your dreams are very active than usual. This is on the 15th of October. Mercury conjunct Venus, it tends to be very nice. We feel very Venusian. It's about pleasure, it's about connection, it's about relationships, but Mercury will turn retrograde on the 31st. And so this is happening again in your communication sign, Virgo. So whatever you're choosing, you might have to choose something different during the Mercury retrograde, or you might have to revisit old choices with Mercury retrograde. So if you're making some commitments or signing things, try to wait till after the retrograde. This is just me doing my due diligence as an astrologer. Libra. Libra, your focus this month is relationships. Happy birthday, Libra. Libra, this is about your, especially with Mars going into the 4th house, or sorry, Mars going into Libra on October 4th. It's a time when you really feel like you have action and motivation and you're moving forward. You have had Mars in what's called your 12th house for the past 5-6 weeks. So maybe things have been happening behind the scenes, but you're about to kind of get really moving this month, Libra. But the day before, on October 3rd, Pluto is turning direct in what's called your 4th house, the sign of home and family. And note, again, this is something that's been ongoing for 11 years, but you've been having to deal with a lot of heavy family stuff, potentially, or needing to look at deep themes around ancestry, emotional needs, how you're getting your emotional needs met. I think Pluto has really, at times, made you rip up the proverbial foundation of your life. And so Pluto turning direct just kind of is another, page in this very long ongoing story. So Venus is going into your money house. The 2nd house is money. So you might be, and Venus is your planet, you might be very focused on getting your material needs met in October. You might be purchasing a lot of things. You might be focusing on your bank account, or making sure you have the resources that you need to live your life. The full moon on the 13th puts the spotlight on relationships. So you might have a decision to make about a current relationship, or it might be a time when somebody else's needs are very much important, or even more important than yours, because Mars kind of does talk about immediacy and action. And then that new moon, again, Scorpio is one of your money signs. You're just entering in a lunar month where it's about getting your material life situated. So it's you could be just making purchases for the home or purchases for things to stock up. I will say, because Mercury is turning retrograde, just if you're making any big purchases, please and thank you, don't make sure you have a receipt. Just, again, doing my due diligence as an astrologer. So Venus square Pluto is today. It just might be a date that feels like a little heavy and like a lot of pressure, because Pluto does that. With the Sun squaring Saturn, it's, you're checking in with family, you're checking in with decisions that you need to make about where you live, or responsibilities in the home. When Venus goes into Scorpio, it's leaving Libra because Venus has been in Libra, and it's going into your money sign. So it's, Scorpio is a little bit of a dark sign, so to speak, for Venus. So it's, like I said, it's very sexy, it's very seductive. It's very much interested in power and control. So you're wanting to kind of take power and control over your material life. Mars opposing Chiron on the 8th might speak to an old relationship wound. Just kind of bringing that up in case something very old comes up, and it might be something where you and your partner are dealing with something, and then you realize it's not really about that person. It's about a story that's much deeper. It goes back to childhood or something. Venus opposes Uranus on the 12th, and you might feel like making a big change because Uranus wants to shake up the status quo. So if you're feeling restless or doing something very dramatic or kind of upending something, you'll know why, because Venus is opposing Uranus. Again, the full moon puts relationships in the spotlight. And then Mars square Saturn is, speaking of relationships, you might have to make a decision about a relationship or need to put some structure or some effort or some boundaries or commitment into a relationship. Scorpio. So for you, Scorpio, you're coming to the end primarily of your zodiac year. So it's a time to rest, and it's a time for endings. It's a time to focus on spiritual health, but also physical health. And Pluto is turning direct in your sign of communication October 3rd. You've been in this very long story of transforming your voice and how you're communicated. This has been an 11-year story. How are people hearing you? It's like really owning the power of your voice. But if you have not been owning the power of your voice, Scorpio, this is a time to really check in with that story. It does also talk about education. So an educational matter might come up with this Pluto direct. To an earlier point that I made, when Mars goes into Libra on the 4th, it's going to go into your 12th sign. I'm a Scorpio, so I'm not super jazzed about Mars going into Libra because it means that Mars is going to be what's called in detriment for 5-6 weeks. It's typically a sign when Scorpio or Scorpio rising, you do feel lower energy. You might be more susceptible to colds. So make sure you're getting a lot of rest, you're taking your vitamin C, you're eating your vegetables, and you're also making time for reflection, meditation, because the 12th house is also a very spiritual house. To everything there is a season. Mars won't get into Scorpio until the 19th of November, so it's going to be a little bit of a longer time. It's a time when you're shedding things and ending things as opposed to beginning things. That said, Venus arrives in Scorpio on the 8th, and it's kind of nice to have Venus in your sign. It makes you a little bit more social, a little bit more flirty, a little bit more stylish. So it might be a time when you're tending to your physical appearance or thinking about beauty and style or even relationships. So the full moon on the 13th puts health in the spotlight, and you might have to tend to your physical health at this time. Maybe get a checkup, maybe check up on something that you've been wanting to check up for a while, or quite simply recommit to some sort of physical exercise. Mars needs to move, Mars being the ruler of Aries. It's in Libra right now, so maybe you're feeling like you can't do anything hardcore. Maybe go swimming, maybe do yoga or Pilates, something kind of light, but something that does work the body. So a Scorpio new moon is, of course, a new beginning, and the sun does go into Scorpio on October 23rd. So you're in Scorpio season. Happy birthday, Scorpio. So this new beginning, so if your birthday is on the 27th or within a few days, it's going to be a powerful new year, meaning you're going to have, it's going to be a year that's very different than the previous one. And that new moon is going to oppose Uranus. And right now, Uranus is in Scorpio's relationship sign. So how Scorpio does relationships needs to completely transform. The status quo needs to completely change. And this new moon, as you have this new beginning, might somehow touch on relationships. That said, Mercury turning in retrograde, you might, maybe to that point earlier about Pluto, owning your voice and owning the power of your voice. With Mercury retrograde in Scorpio, what you're saying, like, you have to be super diligent or aware of what you're saying with Mercury retrograde in Scorpio, because there's the tendency to deal with karma when something is retrograde. So it's like your past of using the voice or your past of communicating. So that's something that you're going to be doing into November. Scorpio, these are your important dates, the main ones being that Mars goes into Libra. Mars is your ruling planet. Sun squares Saturn. The Sun is your career planet, so you might have some serious things around career or some milestones around career on the 7th, some decisions to make on your career direction. Mars opposite Chiron, if you're feeling a little funky, Scorpio, especially as Mars opposes Chiron and Mars is in the 12th, just kind of look at the roots of what you're feeling. Where is it coming from? Is it coming from the present? Is it coming from the past? Because Chiron can sometimes make us feel some very deep stuff. Venus opposite Uranus, Venus being your relationship planet. So hold on tight relationships. You might be seeing some things around the full moon, that's kind of maybe taking relationships or taking how you connect with people in a much different direction. Sun square Pluto, power day for career and ambition on the 14th. Mars square the nodes on the 21st. You just might feel like you're at a crossroads at that time. But Sun goes into Scorpio on the 23rd. It's the start of Scorpio season, and then new beginnings with the Scorpio new moon on the 27th. But that new moon, Mars squares Saturn. So you're entering a lunar month that is serious. You're kind of on Saturn time in November. Saturn time is making sure you have your life in order and you're like doing the right thing and you're working on your lessons. So I know it's your birthday season, you want to celebrate, and maybe, you are, but, you're also thinking about capital L, life, too. Sun opposite Uranus, you might need to take some things in a new direction. Maybe something's going on in your career that completely throws you for a loop, or a new opportunity comes out of nowhere. Uranus can be a bit of a wild card. Sagittarius. So this is about community and friendships this month, the 11th and 5th house. You're in this long story, 11-year story around money and really transforming your relationship with money and your relationship with your material needs. So when Pluto turns direct on October 3rd, it's a check-in with this long story. It's something to kind of keep in mind. Mars going into your 11th house on the 4th. Now, this is a time when you feel very motivated to make connection with friends and community. So you're maybe more social, maybe you're getting more invitations, you're meeting up with groups, people that you're involved with. That's where a lot of the action is happening with friendships and in community. Venus going into your 12th house, it could mean some, love from the past that you're, kind of dealing with and letting go. It's also talking about pulling within and maybe doing a lot of reflection, especially around relationships and connection. So the full moon, this full moon does talk about romance and creativity. The full moon is really asking you to be yourself and to assert yourself and to create and to express, and make sure that you're being yourself, and, in spite of maybe what the world or your community or even your friends want you to be. The Scorpio new moon, now that, the Scorpio for you, Sagittarius, is what's called your last sign. So when you reach the Scorpio new moon, you're coming to the end of your zodiac calendar. So it's a time to pull back, it's a time to retreat and to focus on spirituality. Again, it's just kind of that natural time. So as you're doing so, you're thinking about the year that you've had and what's worked and what hasn't. And you've had a very interesting year, Sagittarius. You've had to think a lot about faith and meaning, and I think also with that Aries full moon, it does talk about confidence. And it's like, how do you get that confidence back after a year of where you maybe haven't had all that confidence at times? So with Mercury retrograde in your 12th house, Sagittarius, I think it's a time when you definitely need to kind of search within for answers. I think with Sagittarius, you're such a, let's say, a sign of searching out information. You're always learning, you're always taking things in, but how are you connecting with that inner voice? So I think Mercury retrograde is kind of bringing you back to your spirituality. Mercury is your sign of your relationship sign. So you might need to kind of go back and let go of some old relationship material. Again, that's what retrogrades do. They kind of give us that opportunity to revisit, reflect, re-choose something, reorganize, and to, kind of have a new look on something. So Sagittarius, your important dates. Mercury going to Scorpio, because Mercury does rule relationships for you. It also rules home and family. So you might be also dealing with some hidden family stuff, some family secrets, some family skeletons, starting on the 3rd. Sun square Saturn is a check-in on how you're handling money and the decisions that you're making around money. Mercury opposes Uranus. Something might surprise you with relationships. You might be feeling really restless. You might need to leave a relationship. Mercury trine Neptune. You're feeling very psychic, very intuitive, which is good if you're kind of spending some time within and alone and reflecting, with Mercury being in your 12th house. And then Mercury conjuncting Venus is happening behind the scenes. I think that's just very nice for spirituality. And then Mercury retrograde. So you're going to be doing a lot of soul searching going into November, Sagittarius. And I think a lot of looking at this deep past around family and around relationships. So it's a lot of things are happening behind the scenes for this month for you, Sagittarius. Capricorn. So for you, Capricorn, it's career, it's direction, it's home, it's family. For you, Capricorn, Libra season is your 10th sign. So you're at the natural peak and height of your personal calendar. It's a time to be visible. It's a time to focus on your ambitions and getting, let's say, recognized for your efforts. Pluto is turning direct in Capricorn October 3rd. And I genuinely do have a lot of compassion for my Capricorns, my Capricorn clients, because you have just been through excuse me, this really long process of transformation. I mean, it's going back 11 years, where at times you've going through a meat grinder. So if you're born later in Capricorn, maybe within the last 10 days, you're going to feel this more than my earlier Capricorns. Nevertheless, pay attention to what's coming up, because Pluto is really trying to show you your stuff, so to speak. Mars going into your career sign of Libra means that you're very focused on your professional ambitions and your professional life for the next 5-6 weeks. Mars in the 10th, it tends to work a lot. It tends to be very focused on getting ahead. So that's something to keep in mind, especially, and it might be a time when you're having some job changes, or you're, maybe there's new positions, maybe you're leaving a job, maybe opportunities are coming in. So Venus in your 11th, it's a good time for socializing. Like I said, Venus is a planet that kind of wants to connect. It wants to, have a good time and be in the pleasure of life. So you're doing that with friends. Definitely reach out to friends if you aren't already. But that full moon, it puts into the spotlight the bottom of your chart, which is foundation, its roots. And now this could be naturally time when you are looking to move, or having to make a decision about where you live. Aries, ruled by Mars, there's no subtlety with Aries. It kind of, like I said, it kind of wants to take action. So things might be kind of flaring up at this time that demands your attention. Capricorn. Scorpio, new moon on the 27th. So this one's happening in friends and community. And so might be a natural time when you are, making more plans, like with friends, or kind of more of your social network and out in your community. It is a time when you're thinking ahead, looking towards the future. What is it that you want in the next, let's say, the next personal year after your birthday? So it's a very, like, a big picture time for you. Scorpio season is a time when you get to kind of zoom out a bit and get a bigger picture. So, Mercury turning retrograde, something does come up within your friends or your social circle. It might be something that you're revisiting into the next month. I will add, especially with that Scorpio new moon, because you have Uranus in what's called your 5th sign, and you will for the next 7 years, you have to really have the courage, Capricorn, to be yourself. And I think this speaks to a bigger process of what's going on, where this kind of the hard shell, or the negative duty and responsibility of the times Capricorn, where you do things because you're supposed to do it, but not because you necessarily want to do it. So it's a month where you have to really get back in touch with your desires. That can kind of help you shift away from this negative relationship with duty and responsibility. Maybe that's a bigger point to make. Capricorn, these are your dates. Big deal with Pluto turning direct on the 3rd, so the first week of you for October is going to be a big one. When Mars goes into Libra, you're starting this, like, it's like a 2-year career peak for you, because Libra is your career sign, and Mars likes to make things happen. Sun square Saturn is checking in on this story of you really trying to get some things about your life in order, and how you're stepping into the role of Saturn right now. Mars opposite Chiron might bring up some stuff about family, or some old childhood wounds or hurts. So this is why I bring that up. It's on the 8th of October. When Venus opposes Uranus on the 12th, pay attention to what is happening in your professional life. It is on the eve of a full moon. Maybe you're thinking about taking your professional life in a different direction. Maybe an opportunity is coming in that seems completely out of left field. Uranus, again, is a little bit that wild card. But there is a need to break with the status quo. The Aries full moon puts home and family into the spotlight on the 13th, so you might have a decision to make about your living situation. Sun square Pluto, that's a kind of a power day for you. Maybe it talks more about these deeper transformations that you're undergoing. And then followed by Mars square the nodes on the 21st. You might whatever changes in your home situation that you're making or with family might feel a little bit faded, like it's, based on something very deep. And then Mars squares Saturn on the 27th. You might be dealing with either having to make a decision about where you live, needing to talk kind of with family responsibilities or responsibilities in the home. You are in a time in your life where you're having to be more Saturn, because Saturn is in Capricorn right now. So there's a lot of pressure on you to kind of do what you're supposed to do, but it's like, how do you do that and still, not get crushed by it? How do you still get a chance to be you, Capricorn? Aquarius, so we're starting to round things out. Aquarius being the 11th sign of the zodiac, the second to last sign of the zodiac. So Aquarius, this is about travel and education, because the new and the full moons are in your what's called your ninth and your third house. So that said, Pluto is turning direct on the 3rd, and Pluto is in your what's called your 12th sign. So a lot of Plutonian stuff is happening behind the scenes. It's coming up in dreams. It's coming up in your spirituality. So just pay attention to what's what's happening in your dreams around that time, or what sort of intuition you're getting, because for you, Capricorn represents your blind spot, and Pluto is in your blind spot right now, and Pluto's job is to reveal. So just note this first week of October, it's about seeing what's in your blind spot, and it might not be pretty. It might be stuff that you haven't realized, and so there's kind of this deeper inner work that's happening with this Pluto direct. But what I was beginning to say, because it's the time of travel and education, Mars going to Libra on the 4th might mean that you've got a big trip planned. The 9th house is a house that likes to travel, but travel far. It's not, traveling like a commute. It's like traveling to another state or going, to another country. So you might be looking towards a long journey in October, Aquarius. But if you can't travel, it's certainly a very philosophical time, a time when you have to kind of express, and maybe in a diplomatic way, Libra, what you believe in. What is your truth? What is your faith? Because 9th house is the house of faith, and it's more earthly spirituality. It's more like religion, but also it's like, how do we see ourselves and how do we see the world? Venus going into the 10th house on October 8th. Having Venus in your career sign just kind of helps to open some doors professionally, because Venus kind of is like a helper planet. And then the full moon on the 13th, it's in what's called your 3rd sign. So this full moon is about information and education. You might need to take a class. It might be getting more information, messages. It might be a busy time. You might be back and forth in a car or traveling, shorter distance. But I think with it being Mars, and Mars is very much about immediacy, I think you're going to have something to say around this full moon. And then 2 weeks later, there is a new moon, and that one's in your career sign. So Scorpio is Aquarius's career sign. And so Scorpio season, of course, with all the planets starting to go into Scorpio, means that it's very much about your professional life, your ambitions, and the direction you want to go in life. And so you might be seeing professional new beginnings in October, especially with the new moon, and even into November. You might be changing jobs. You might have new opportunities. You might have these new initiatives to move forward in your life. I think with Mars squares Saturn, you do have to get very serious about your kind of professional direction. Uranus, because the new moon does make an opposition to Uranus, that's down in your family sign. So some things might be happening in your professional life that do impact your home environment. Maybe you have to move for your job, or maybe you have to make some changes in your home based on your career ambitions. So I'm just, putting that out there. Um, if you do make any big moves in your professional life, do know that Mercury is turning retrograde. It doesn't mean you can't accept a job. Just double check everything. I always just say, just allow for some wiggle room when Mercury is in retrograde, but it will be retrograding through your career sign into November. So these are your dates, Aquarius. I think because the sun is your relationship planet, when it squares the nodes and it squares Saturn on the 6th and 7th of October, I think maybe there's something happening in the relationship department. If you're single, like, what do you want? How do you take the steps to go after what you want? If you're already in a relationship, pay attention to what themes are coming up. Maybe you and a partner are at a crossroads in some way. Venus opposing Uranus. So Venus is the planet that talks about home and family for you. And on the 12th, when it opposes Uranus, you might need to make a radical decision about your roots or your family or where you're living. Maybe there's a sudden move, or maybe you're like suddenly looking to move it to a different part of the country or world. I don't know. I'm just kind of riffing here. You'll have to see what comes out. I mean, it is right the day before a full moon. Sun squared Pluto on the 14th is a power day. It does talk also about needing to look at power and control within a relationship, especially things that you're not seeing. The Scorpio new moon does open a new beginning in relationship in your career. Excuse me. So going into November, it is about new beginnings and new opportunities in your professional life. Mars square Saturn, like I said, whatever decisions you are making, whatever opportunities are coming your way, they are serious. You are at a point, Aquarius, where a lot of things are happening behind the scenes. Saturn is your planet. And next year, from March until July, Saturn will be in Aquarius. There'll be a little dip. So I feel like you're getting ready for some bigger life milestones and some bigger changes. And I think this month is kind of giving you a little bit of a preview. Sun opposes Uranus on the 28th. Because Sun is about relationships, something might be a little confrontational. You might have to see things in a different way. You might have to even see your partner in a different way, or see somebody in a different way. Last sign, guys, Pisces. So for you, Pisces, this is kind of focusing on money this month, money, security, resources, but it's also focusing on the deeper side of things, the psyche. Pluto, it's turning direct on the 3rd in your sign of community and friendships. I think also with Saturn there as well, since the beginning of 2018, you might be doing a lot of heavy lifting and deep work on the people who are your friends. Sometimes when Saturn goes through this part of your chart, it can test a lot of your friendships, and maybe even friendships have left in this time. But I think there's a deeper thing that's happening, especially with Pluto having been in Capricorn for 11 years, is that you have to do a lot of deep digging and transforming the people that you connect with overall. Having relationships and even social connections or connections within your community. I think ultimately this is about you really finding the people that are really your people. Mars enters Libra on the 4th. It's your 8th house. This is a time when you're having to kind of face a lot of uncomfortable emotions within yourself. It's kind of this very psychologically driven. You're feeling, you might deep emotions that are coming up. It also does talk about money. So you're having to look at themes of finance and assets and debt, and even like wealth. But I sometimes find when Mars goes to the 8th, you're really feeling vulnerable. You're really feeling, and it's nobody likes to feel vulnerable, but pay attention to the emotions and feelings that are coming up this month. Um, Venus in Scorpio on the 9th, you might be doing some travel. So, Venus likes to jet. She likes to visit other countries and explore other cultures. The Aries full moon on the 13th, however, puts money and spending and resources in the spotlight. Um, so you might have to make a decision about how you are spending your money, how you're earning a living. And maybe you need to kind of take some action, Aries, in that department. Aries also talks about, for you, your material needs. Like, how do you go after, how do you get on the hunt about what you really need on a material side of things? The Scorpio new moon, again, because I was talking about travel a few moments ago with Venus, this is a time when you may be thinking about making like a big trip to another part of the country or another country in general, but there's a sense of distance that is being traveled in October and into November. There can be a time when you're feeling very philosophical as well. You're focusing on what your truth is, what your beliefs are, how you see the world, but also maybe even higher education. This could be opening a new time where you're more focused on higher education. That said, because Mercury is turning retrograde in one of your travel signs, that if you are traveling, just make sure you give yourself some wiggle room, because Mercury likes to Mercury during the retrograde. So just have a plan B. That's all. But I think that there's a deeper thing that's going on where, how do you see the world? What do you believe in? What has led you to these beliefs? Is it the education that you got? Is it the books that you read? And it's, maybe you have to go back and get new information, because as I was saying very early on in this presentation, Mercury in Scorpio likes to reveal, and sometimes it reveals things that are a little uncomfortable. So you might be having to unwind and to sift through some deeper points around truth and what is really the truth. These are your dates, Pisces. Mercury in Scorpio is a big deal because Mercury is one of your major planets. It talks about home, it talks about relationships for you. So maybe some of these truths and maybe some of these revelations have to do with relationships. Sun square Saturn is just checking in on how you're working on your friendships, building friendships, making new friendships, building your social circle, and especially building a social circle with the people that deserve to be there and not just anybody. Mercury opposing Uranus on the 7th can be a bit confrontational. Again, if you need to see things differently, Uranus is a planet of consciousness. It will kind of turn on the proverbial light for you. So you can, get a brainwave, so to speak, where suddenly you have an epiphany, or maybe you learn something or hear something that doesn't fit within the way that you see yourself or see the world. So it might be confrontational. Again, Mercury trine Neptune on the 15th just might feel very intuitive, might need to, your dreams are more active than usual. Mercury conjunct Venus on the 30th is very beautiful for travel, for maybe even romance in far-flung places. But Mercury is retrograde, so you are dealing with something from the past and rewinding through old choices and patterns. So that, I'm gonna stop the screen share. So I know it's been a long presentation, it's been 2 hours so far, so I really thank you guys for sitting with me, most of you, and listening about each of the 12 signs and what they are experiencing through this month. I'm happy to take questions if you have any questions, and even if you are on the replay and you have a question about your sign, please let me know. So it's been a pleasure. I think October, to kind of recap some finer points, October is a month where we are getting a little bit of an eclipse wobble. So an eclipse wobble means that these bigger themes that we have been working through, in January and July, some of the doors that have been opening and closing, we're coming back to those stories. Eclipses in general, they just push along the narrative of our life. It says that one part of our life, things are opening up, and one part of our life, things are kind of releasing and letting go, depending on where the eclipses are. So this month, Mars is going to kind of, activate those eclipse degrees. And so when that happens, life's going to heat up. Mars makes things go. So we've got these points in the sky with the eclipses that are, let's say, hot, so to speak. And when Mars activates them, we're going to maybe see some events come up, or some twists, some turns, some opportunities. So it's important to know where those eclipses have been activating. You can see that in previous write-ups I've done about the eclipses, or even a previous webinar I did about the eclipses, to kind of tell you what part of your life is changing. So again, unless there's any other questions, my name is Katie Sweetman, and this has been my presentation on the astrology of October 2019, how to plan for it in particular, how to understand some of the stories that are unfolding. Again, it's Libra season, which is about relationships. The moving from Libra to Scorpio, moving from connection, but then to the scarier parts of connection, which is intimacy and vulnerability, and even sexuality when we go into Scorpio season. So these are the two themes that we're working through this October. So that was just to recap what's going on. So thank you all. It's been a pleasure, and I know a lot of you have continued to be a part of my webinars, and I really thank you for being with me. So until the next time, I will say goodbye. Bye.